My Uber driver locked the doors and told me not to get out. I thought he was kidnapping me. Then he pointed at my house and said 3 words that made my blood run cold. They're waiting inside. It was almost midnight on a Thursday. I was coming home from a work event downtown, tired and ready to collapse into bed. The ride had been quiet and uneventful until we turned onto my street. That's when I heard the click of all 4 doors locking at once. I reached for the handle instinctively. It wouldn't budge. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice rising with panic. "Let me out right now." The driver, a man in his 50s with graying hair, didn't speed up or pull over. He just kept driving at the same steady pace, his eyes flicking between the road and the rearview mirror. "Don't get out at your stop," he said calmly. "Pretend you're asleep. Close your eyes and don't move." I thought this was it. This was how people disappeared. I was about to start screaming, about to pound on the windows and pray someone would hear me. But something in his voice made me hesitate. He didn't sound threatening. He sounded scared. "Trust me," he whispered. "They're waiting." I didn't understand what he meant. Not until he drove slowly past my house, and I forced myself to look through half-closed eyes, pretending to be asleep like he told me. 2 men were standing in the shadows beside my front door. One of them was holding something that caught the light from the street lamp, something metal. Across the street, parked where the streetlight had burned out, was a dark blue van I recognized immediately. It belonged to my ex-boyfriend, Nolan, the man I had filed a restraining order against 3 weeks ago, the man who had promised me that a piece of paper wouldn't keep him away. He was leaning against the van, arms crossed, watching my house like he had all the time in the world, and I had almost walked right into whatever he had planned. To understand how I ended up in that car, frozen with fear while a stranger drove me past my own home, you need to know how Nolan came into my life in the first place. Subscribe for more stories and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Kira. I'm 24 years old, and 2 years ago I moved from a small town in Oklahoma to Austin, Texas for a job I had dreamed about since college. I work as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup downtown. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. I built this life from nothing. I found my own apartment, made my own friends, learned to navigate a city where I didn't know a single person. My mom, Jolene, still calls me every Sunday night to check in. My younger brother Davis sends me stupid memes at 2 in the morning. My dad, Hank, isn't much of a talker, but he texts me the weather forecast every single day without fail. I miss them, but I love my independence. 8 months ago, I met a man named Nolan Vickers at a coffee shop near my office. He was charming in a way that felt effortless. He remembered little things I said and brought them up weeks later. He surprised me with flowers at work. He texted me good morning every day and good night every evening. He made me feel like I was the center of his universe. For the first few months, it felt like I had stumbled into something perfect, but perfect doesn't last. Not with someone like Nolan. The first red flag came about 3 months in. I went to happy hour with some coworkers and forgot to text him beforehand. When I got home, he was waiting outside my apartment. He said he had been worried. He said he just wanted to make sure I was safe. At the time, I thought it was sweet. I didn't realize it was a warning sign. After that, things got worse. He got upset when I didn't respond to his texts fast enough. He questioned who I was spending time with. He showed up at my office unannounced, claiming he wanted to surprise me with lunch. When I told him his behavior was making me uncomfortable, he turned it around on me. He said I was being ungrateful. He said he only acted that way because he loved me so much. I broke up with him 5 months ago. I told him clearly that we were done and asked him to stop contacting me. He didn't listen. The calls started the same night, dozens of them, one after another. Then came the emails, long rambling messages that swung between apologies and accusations. He showed up at my house twice, both times late at night. The first time, he pounded on my door for 20 minutes, begging me to talk to him. The second time, he tried to break in through a window. I called the police both times. The second time, I filed for a restraining order. The court granted it 3 weeks before that night. Nolan was legally required to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. I thought it was over. I thought the system had finally protected me. For those 3 weeks, I started to breathe again. I slept through the night. I stopped checking over my shoulder every time I walked to my car. I told myself that the nightmare was behind me and I could move forward with my life. On the night everything changed, my company was hosting a product launch party downtown. I stayed late, had a glass of wine, and talked with coworkers about nothing important. I left around 11 and ordered an Uber from the sidewalk outside the venue. The car that arrived was a gray sedan driven by a man named Solomon. That's what the app said anyway. He was polite when I got in, confirmed my address, and started driving. I put in my earbuds, leaned my head against the window, and watched the city lights blur past. I was tired. I just wanted to go home. I had no idea that home was the last place I should go. I had no idea that Nolan had been watching, waiting, planning. I had no idea that a stranger in the front seat of an Uber was about to save my life. The ride started like any other. I sat in the back seat with my earbuds in, half listening to a podcast I had already heard twice. The city lights passed by outside the window in streaks of orange and white. I wasn't paying attention to the route. I wasn't paying attention to anything. I just wanted to get home, take off my heels, and crawl into bed. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed the driver glancing in his rearview mirror, not at me, but at something behind us. He did it once, then again, then a third time. I pulled out one earbud and shifted in my seat to look through the back window. A dark van was following about 2 car lengths behind us. It had been there for a while, I realized. I just hadn't noticed until now. I told myself it was nothing. Austin is a big city. Lots of vehicles take the same routes at night. There was no reason to think this van had anything to do with me. Solomon made a sudden turn onto a side street. I lurched slightly in my seat, surprised by the movement. The van turned too. He made another turn, this time onto a narrow residential road lined with parked cars. The van stayed with us, maintaining the same distance, never falling back and never getting closer. My heart started beating faster. "Is everything okay?" I asked. Solomon didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the mirror. "That vehicle has been following us since we left downtown," he said quietly. "Do you know anyone who drives a dark blue van?" The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. I knew exactly who drove a dark blue van. Nolan used it for his landscaping business. I had ridden in that van a dozen times when we were together. I could still picture the interior, the smell of grass clippings and gasoline, the way he drummed his fingers on the steering wheel when he drove. "My ex-boyfriend," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. "He has a van like that." Solomon's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Is he someone you're worried about?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no and pretend everything was fine, but my hands were shaking in my lap, and I couldn't make myself form the words. "I have a restraining order against him," I admitted. "He's not supposed to come anywhere near me." Solomon nodded slowly, processing this information. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He didn't tell me I was probably imagining things. He just kept driving, his eyes moving between the road ahead and the mirror behind. "Do you want me to take you somewhere else?" he asked. "A friend's house? A police station?" I should have said yes. I know that now, but in that moment, I was frozen. I couldn't think straight. Part of me was convinced I was being paranoid, that the van was just a coincidence, that Nolan wouldn't be stupid enough to violate the restraining order when he knew he could go to jail. "Just take me home," I said. I'm probably overthinking this. Solomon didn't argue, but I could see in the set of his jaw that he didn't agree with my decision. We approached my neighborhood, and the van stayed behind us the whole way. When we turned onto my street, I leaned forward in my seat, straining to see my house up ahead. The porch light was off. I always left it on. I specifically remembered turning it on before I left for the work event because I knew I would be coming home late. My stomach dropped. Before I could say anything, Solomon pressed a button on his door panel. I heard the click of all 4 locks engaging at once. I grabbed the door handle and pulled. Nothing happened. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Let me out." Solomon's voice was steady but urgent. "Don't get out at your stop. Pretend you're asleep. Close your eyes and don't move." "Why? What's going on?" He glanced in the rearview mirror, and this time his eyes met mine. "Trust me, they're waiting." I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand, but something in his voice made me obey. I closed my eyes halfway, letting my head fall against the window like I had dozed off. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was sure Solomon could hear it. He drove past my house at a slow, steady pace. Through my barely open eyes, I saw shapes in the darkness beside my front door. 2 men I didn't recognize, standing in the shadows where the porch light should have been. One of them was holding something in his hand, something that caught the glow from the street lamp down the block. Metal, a tool, or a weapon, I couldn't tell which. And across the street, parked beneath a broken streetlight, was the dark blue van. Nolan was leaning against the driver's side door with his arms crossed over his chest. He was watching my house with the patient expression of someone who had been waiting a long time, someone who knew exactly what he was doing. If Solomon had let me out at my door, I would have walked right into them. I would have been alone in the dark with 3 men who had disabled my porch light and waited in the shadows for me to come home. Solomon kept driving. He didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He just kept that same steady pace until we were 3 blocks away and my house had disappeared from view. Only then did I let myself breathe. Solomon pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy 3 blocks from my house. He turned off the engine and sat in silence for a moment, his hands still resting on the steering wheel. The lot was nearly empty, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. It felt like the safest place in the world compared to the darkness we had just driven through. He turned around in his seat to face me. His expression was serious, but kind. "I saw them when we were still a mile out," he said. "The van was already parked on your street. Those men were standing at your door, like they belonged there. This wasn't a coincidence. They were waiting for you." I couldn't respond. My throat was tight, and my hands were trembling in my lap. I kept seeing Nolan's face in my mind, the way he had leaned against that van with his arms crossed, so calm and patient, like he had done this before, like he had planned every detail. "Do you know who they are?" Solomon asked. "The other 2 men?" I shook my head. I had never seen them before. Nolan had friends from his landscaping crew, guys he hung out with on weekends, but I had only met a few of them. They could have been anyone. "He brought backup," I whispered. "He actually brought people to help him." The reality of those words sank into my chest like a stone. This wasn't Nolan showing up drunk and emotional, pounding on my door and begging me to take him back. This was something else entirely. He had planned this. He had recruited people. He had disabled my porch light so I wouldn't see them until it was too late. "We need to call the police," Solomon said firmly. "Right now, before they realize you're not coming home." I nodded, but I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, disconnected from my brain. I kept thinking about all the times I had called the police before, the reports I had filed, the restraining order I had fought so hard to get. None of it had stopped him. None of it had kept me safe. "What if they don't believe me?" I asked. My voice cracked on the last word. "What if they show up and Nolan is gone? He'll just say he was driving through the neighborhood. He'll make me look crazy." Solomon shook his head. "You have a restraining order. He's not allowed within 500 feet of your home. Even if he claims he was just passing through, he can't explain away 2 men hiding in the shadows by your front door at midnight. The police will take this seriously." I looked at this man I had never met before tonight, a stranger who drove people around the city for a living. He could have dropped me off at my door and moved on to his next fare. He could have minded his own business. Instead, he had paid attention when something didn't look right. He had trusted his instincts and made a choice that probably saved my life. "Why did you help me?" I asked. "You don't even know me." Solomon was quiet for a moment. "I have a daughter about your age," he said. "She lives in Houston. Every time she tells me she got home safe, I breathe a little easier. I think about the drivers who pick her up late at night, and I hope they're paying attention. I hope they would do the same thing if they saw something wrong." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "I couldn't live with myself if I dropped you off at that house knowing what was waiting there." Something shifted inside me. For months, I had felt powerless. I had done everything right, followed every rule, filed every report, and Nolan was still there, still watching, still waiting. I had started to believe that nothing I did would ever be enough. that he would always find a way to get to me. But sitting in that pharmacy parking lot with a stranger who had chosen to help me, I realized something. I wasn't alone. Not everyone looked away. Not everyone chose to stay out of it. And I was done being afraid. "Call them," I said. "Call the police. I'll tell them everything." Solomon nodded and pulled out his phone. He dialed 911 and explained the situation in clear, calm language. He gave them my address, described the van and the men, mentioned the restraining order. The dispatcher told us to stay where we were. Officers were being sent to my street immediately. I sat in the back seat of that Uber, my heart pounding, and waited for the police to do their job. But this time, something was different. I wasn't hiding in my apartment, hoping the problem would go away. I wasn't convincing myself that maybe I was overreacting. This time, I was fighting back. The police arrived on my street within 12 minutes. Solomon and I sat in the pharmacy parking lot, listening to the distant wail of sirens growing closer. When he offered to drive me back so I could see what was happening, I said yes without hesitation. I needed to see it. I needed to know it was real. We approached my street from the opposite direction, parking at the end of the block where we had a clear view but stayed out of the way. 4 police cars had converged on my house, their red and blue lights painting the quiet neighborhood in flashes of color. Neighbors were stepping out onto their porches in bathrobes, confused and curious about the commotion. The dark blue van was still there, but Nolan wasn't leaning against it anymore. He was on the ground, face down on the asphalt, with an officer's knee pressed into his back. His hands were being cuffed behind him while he shouted something I couldn't hear from this distance. The 2 men who had been waiting by my door were already in custody, each one being led to a separate patrol car by officers who gripped their arms firmly. I watched them get loaded into the back seats, one by one. The men I didn't recognize went first, their heads pushed down as they ducked into the cars. Then Nolan. An officer pulled him to his feet and walked him toward the last patrol car. Even from a block away, I could see the rage on his face. His jaw was clenched, his body tense with anger. This wasn't the charming man who had bought me flowers and remembered every little detail about my life. This was the real Nolan, the one who couldn't stand being told no. A female officer approached our car and asked if I was Kira. I nodded, and she asked me to step out so she could speak with me. Solomon gave me an encouraging look as I opened the door and walked over to meet her. She introduced herself as Officer Reyna and told me what they had found. Nolan and his 2 accomplices had arrived at my house around 9 that evening, 3 hours before I was expected to come home from the work event. They had unscrewed the bulb in my porch light to create darkness by the front door. In the back of Nolan's van, officers discovered a bag containing zip ties, duct tape, a hunting knife, and a bottle of chloroform. I felt my knees go weak. Chloroform. He had planned to drug me. If you had walked up to that door alone tonight, this would be a very different conversation, Officer Reyna said. Her voice was gentle but serious. You're very lucky that your driver noticed something was wrong. Lucky. The word echoed in my head. I didn't feel lucky. I felt sick. I felt angry. I felt relieved and terrified all at the same time. What happens now? I asked. He'll be booked tonight. Violation of a restraining order, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, possession of weapons with intent to harm. Given the evidence, I doubt any judge will grant him bail. He's going to be locked up for a long time. I nodded, but I couldn't find words. I just stood there on the sidewalk, watching the patrol cars prepare to leave. One of them drove past us on its way to the station. Through the back window, I saw Nolan's face. He was staring directly at me, his eyes burning with hatred. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear through the glass. I didn't need to hear them to know what he was saying. For a moment, I felt the old fear rise up in my chest, the instinct to look away, to make myself small, to avoid provoking him. That fear had controlled me for months. It had made me second-guess myself, question my own judgment, wonder if maybe I was overreacting. But not tonight. I held his gaze. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I stared right back at him until the patrol car turned the corner and disappeared from view. When he was gone, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Solomon had gotten out of the car and was standing nearby, giving me space but staying close enough to offer support. I walked over to him, my legs unsteady, but my mind clearer than it had been in months. "Thank you," I said. "I don't know how to repay you for what you did tonight." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Just live your life. That's enough." I promised him I would. Nolan was denied bail the next morning. The judge took one look at the evidence, the zip ties, the duct tape, the chloroform, and decided he was too dangerous to release. He sat in county jail for 4 months waiting for his trial. I was told he spent most of that time claiming he was innocent, that I had set him up, that none of it was his fault. Some people never change. They just get better at making excuses. The 2 men who had been waiting at my door were identified as friends from his landscaping crew. They claimed Nolan had told them we were just going to talk, that he wanted to apologize and win me back. Whether they were lying or genuinely that naive, I'll never know. They both took plea deals and received 5 years each. Nolan went to trial. I had to testify, which was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I sat in that witness chair and told the jury everything. The months of harassment, the late-night visits, the fear that had become my constant companion. I described the night Solomon saved my life, how close I came to walking into whatever Nolan had planned. His lawyer tried to make me look unstable. He suggested I was exaggerating, that Nolan was just a heartbroken man who made some poor decisions. But the evidence was undeniable. The chloroform alone was enough to prove this wasn't some misguided romantic gesture. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Nolan to 12 years in prison. When the verdict was read, he didn't react. He just stared at me from across the courtroom with that same cold expression I had seen through the patrol car window. I stared right back. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. My family came to Austin the day after the arrest. My mom showed up with 2 suitcases and announced she was staying for as long as I needed her. She helped me install a security system with cameras and motion sensors. She cooked dinner every night and sat with me when I couldn't sleep. My brother Davis drove down from Oklahoma and refused to leave for almost 2 weeks. He slept on my couch and walked me to my car every morning before work. My dad didn't say much when he arrived, but he held me for a long time. He's never been good with words, but that hug said everything. I tried to find Solomon through the Uber app. I wanted to thank him properly, to tell him how much his actions had meant to me. It took a few weeks, but I finally managed to send him a message. He agreed to meet me for coffee at a cafe near downtown. He looked the same as he had that night, calm, steady, kind. I thanked him again, and he waved it off like it was nothing. "I just did what anyone should do," he said. "Most people wouldn't have noticed," I told him. "Most people would have minded their own business." He smiled at that. I've been driving long enough to see things other people miss. A van following too close. Men standing where they shouldn't be. You learn to pay attention. You learn to trust your gut. I asked if there was anything I could do to repay him. He shook his head. "Live your life," he said. "Be happy. That's all the thanks I need." I moved out of that rental house a month later. I found an apartment in a building with a doorman and security cameras in every hallway. I started seeing a therapist who specializes in trauma. I joined a support group for women who have survived stalking and abuse. I learned that my story wasn't unique. Thousands of women face the same terror every day, and not all of them are as fortunate as I was. I volunteer now with an organization that helps survivors navigate the legal system. I sit with women in courtrooms while they testify. I help them fill out paperwork for restraining orders. I tell them my story when they need to hear that things can get better. That night changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I used to think strength meant handling everything on your own, never asking for help, never showing weakness. Now I know that real strength is recognizing when you need support and having the courage to accept it. It's trusting your instincts, even when your mind tries to convince you that you're overreacting. It's refusing to let fear control your life. I got into an Uber that night expecting a simple ride home. Instead, I got a second chance. A stranger who paid attention when it mattered most gave me back my future. I think about Solomon often. I think about his daughter in Houston and hope she always gets home safe. I think about how one small choice, one moment of awareness, changed the entire trajectory of my life. I'm not the same person I was before that night. I'm stronger, I'm more careful, and I will never stop being grateful for the stranger who saved me. If you want more stories, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.